Matt Gaetz joining us here on the Day in Politics, Congressman from Florida's 1st Congressional District. Switching gears a little bit to some Florida politics, who do you believe has the best shot of defeating Stephanie Murphy in Florida's 7th Congressional District?
Joel Greenberg.
Joel Greenberg, huh?
Joel Greenberg has gone into the Seminole County tax collector's office. He's taken it by storm. He's been a disruptor, and he's brought sort of a modern approach to management to that office. And if you look at what people want in the country right now, they want that disruptor. They want someone with business experience, and they want someone who's not going to adhere to the dogmas that have strangled progress in Washington, D.C. for a generation.
The clip you just heard, in which Congressman Matt Gaetz suggested Joel Greenberg was the ideal candidate to challenge Stephanie Murphy for her seat in Congress, was from a radio interview from June 2017. That's only about 6 months after Greenberg had taken office as Seminole's tax collector, following his shocking upset of a longtime incumbent. Already, Matt Gaetz and Joel Greenberg were forming a political friendship and alliance as two ascendant figures in Florida Republican politics, with similar styles. They were brash, sometimes crossing the border into trollish. They courted controversies that sometimes became scandals. They had aligned themselves with the newly elected president, Donald Trump, and adopted his self-styled political persona as an outsider, unafraid to challenge the establishment. Though, as with Trump, both Greenberg and Gaetz had led lives of privilege. Hello and welcome to Joel Greenberg, the man, the scandal, the players, brought to you by the Orlando Sentinel. I'm your host, Jeff Weiner. For several years, Gaetz and Greenberg seemed to relish their alliance, being seen together frequently at gatherings and around town in Seminole County, even though Gaetz's Panhandle district was a solid 6-hour drive away. They boosted each other's political endeavors and merged their networks of power brokers. Gaetz considered Greenberg his wingman. Now, Greenberg is a pariah, and their friendship, for Gaetz, is a liability. Greenberg faces a slew of federal charges, 33 as the case now stands, and is slated to reach a plea agreement with prosecutors by May 15th. According to reports, he has already spoken with investigators about Gaetz, as the feds probe whether the two men paid for sex and travel with women and a teenage girl, in violation of federal sex trafficking laws. Greenberg is already charged with trafficking the girl. Gaetz has denied any wrongdoing and says he has never paid for sex or had sex with a minor when he was an adult. Later in this series, we'll delve into Greenberg's backstory. But in this episode, we're going to focus on his relationship with Gaetz, as well as another figure whose name has been linked to the sprawling federal investigation. First, let's talk about Gaetz, a child of Florida's political royalty, who became a top ambassador for the MAGA right.
Well, Matt Gaetz comes from a political background. His grandfather was a mayor back in North Dakota. His father was a former Senate president here in Florida. So he's not, coming out of nowhere. And he grew up in Seaside, which is a planned Panhandle beach town that, coincidentally, is the place that they used to film Jim Carrey's home in the movie The Truman Show.
Coming to you now from the largest studio ever constructed, it's The Truman Show!
That's Stephen Lemongello, the Orlando Sentinel's politics editor. He tracks the goings-on in Tallahassee and among Central Florida's delegation to Washington, which does not include Matt Gaetz. But if you cover politics anywhere in Florida, it's hard not to wind up covering Matt Gaetz. Gaetz has a habit of attaching himself to controversies and red meat issues for his political base, Florida's deeply red District 1, which includes Pensacola and Fort Walton Beach. But before he made it to the halls of Congress, before he became a fixture on Fox News, he attracted both fame and infamy as a member of Florida's legislature.
Having a famous name in the Panhandle, he was elected to the Florida House in a special election in 2010 during the Tea Party wave that year. One of his first, more notorious things was he held hearings on the state's Stand Your Ground law immediately following the Trayvon Martin killing in Sanford. But he said beforehand, before he even had any of the hearings, that he wouldn't change, quote, one damn comma, unquote.
While in the legislature, Gaetz was among the subjects of a long-standing rumor, which bordered on an open secret, about a game created by a group of Florida House members in which they awarded each other points for having sex with colleagues.
This has sort of been talked about for a long time in Tallahassee. It first came to the forefront about 5 or 6 years ago from the Miami Herald. that he and other, young male legislators in Tallahassee created a game that would get points for sleeping with aides, interns, lobbyists, legislators.
Over several years, the rumor crept out into the open in a series of reports by Florida news outlets. Then, during a Twitter spat last year, State Representative Chris Latvala, a fellow Republican from Clearwater, accused Gaetz of having created the game. He denied it. A recent report by Business Insider added new details. Gaetz and his fellow Florida lawmakers, it said, also got bonus points for spending the night at a college sorority house. And the group regarded one particular conservative female politician as the snitch, a reference to the golden winged ball in the fictional sport known as Quidditch from the Harry Potter book series, which meant that sleeping with her meant you won the game regardless of points. Another chapter of Gaetz' time in the State House that has come under fresh scrutiny in the wake of the current scandal is his opposition to a bill meant to stop people from sharing sexually explicit images of their ex-lovers, a practice often referred to as revenge porn. When the non-consensual porn legislation finally passed in 2015, Gaetz was one of only 2 votes against it. But according to a former state legislator who fought for years to ban revenge porn, Gaetz' opposition went well beyond that. The Sentinel's Jason Garcia shed new light on the full extent of Gaetz' role in a recent report.
A Republican from Brevard County named Tom Goodson had been trying several years to pass a bill making non-consensual pornography a crime, and the biggest obstacle in the Florida legislature was Matt Gaetz. Tom Goodson told the Orlando Sentinel that, quote, Matt was absolutely against it. He thought the picture was his to do with what he wanted. He thought that any picture was his to use as he wanted to, as an expression of his rights. Matt Gaetz was able to successfully block this bill. One year, he refused to give it a hearing as the chairman of the House Criminal Justice Subcommittee. It eventually did pass with only 2 people voting against it, Matt Gaetz and his roommate, John Tobiah.
That position, that the owner of a nude image should have the right to do with it as they see fit, is particularly jarring in the context of recent reports indicating that Gaetz, as a member of Congress, has shown photos and videos of naked women he had sex with to colleagues, including while on the floor of the U.S. House of Representatives. Gaetz sought to make the jump from Tallahassee to Washington in 2016. And though he would later become one of the new president's most vocal supporters and defenders, he didn't initially board the Trump train, as Stephen Lemongello explains.
Gaetz really wasn't a MAGA person when he, kicked off his election campaign in 2016. I believe he backed Jeb Bush, as did many Florida politicians. But, once both were elected in the same day, he went full MAGA.
That fall, in 2016, was when Greenberg began his political rise, defeating a longtime incumbent, Ray Valdez, in a Republican primary for tax collector. Because there was only a write-in candidate facing Greenberg in the general election, his primary night victory that August made him a de facto elected official. Within weeks, he was on stage at a Trump rally in Sanford, exhorting the MAGA faithful with a call to action.
Donald Trump has the courage to say to our enemy that there is a price we will not pay, there is a point which they must not advance, and there is a line drawn in the sand which they dare not cross. Donald Trump has faith in all of us that we have the ability and we have the dignity and we have the right to make our own decisions and determine our own destiny. On November 8th, with Seminole County's help, Donald Trump will be elected the next president of the United States, and Donald Trump will deliver. Thank you, and God bless.
Trump, Greenberg, and Gaetz were all elected on the same day, with Gaetz quickly establishing himself among the vanguard of Trump ultra-loyalists in Congress, willing to stick with the embattled president through thick and thin over the years that followed.
He was a regular on Air Force One, spoke at Trump's rallies across the state and across the country. And one of his most notorious acts before everything that happened this year was in 2019. He and a bunch of others essentially stormed a classified impeachment hearing in what was supposed to be a secure room in the U.S. Capitol.
I'm gathered here with dozens of my congressional colleagues underground in the basement of the Capitol, because if behind those doors they intend to overturn the results of an American presidential election, We want to know what's going on.
They had their cell phones with them because they were sort of tweeting through it. And of course, you're not supposed to have any kind of, cell phone or mobile phone or thing like that.
Gaetz's penchant for courting controversy and political stunts followed him to Congress.
So very early on in the coronavirus pandemic, Gaetz appeared on the floor of the House in a full gas mask, not just a regular mask, but a full, Chernobyl-style, working with chemicals gas mask. He said that he was, the text was, he's reviewing the coronavirus supplemental appropriation and preparing to go vote. He later said that it was not a joke. He took things very seriously, and in fact, just a few days after that, he had to announce that he was self-quarantining because he came into contact with an individual at CPAC who had been diagnosed with coronavirus.
When Joel Greenberg took office as tax collector, it quickly became apparent that he was bound for an eventful term in office. He launched schemes to sell taxpayer-owned properties, he allowed employees to openly carry guns, he made himself a tax collector badge and even pulled over a speeder with a flashing light on his dashboard, an incident that was reviewed by local authorities as a possible crime. But despite all of that, within a couple years of taking office, Greenberg told a Sentinel reporter that he was bored with the job voters had given him, which he found to be repetitive and limiting, restricting his ability to break out into new business ventures. There was one perk of the job he seemed to relish, the proximity it gave him to other powerful people. Greenberg often talked about how wealthy and powerful his family was, his father, Andrew Greenberg, having started Greenberg Dental in the 1980s, which now has 92 offices in Florida. But his family didn't have a track record of involvement in local politics. Joel wanted to change that. He soon began making social appearances with a web of well-connected people, few more frequently than Gaetz. Martin Comas has reported on the relationship.
So their relationship really they became very, very chummy soon after they both won seats to political office. Joel Greenberg in Seminole County as tax collector and Matt Gaetz to Congress.
On July 8, 2017, Greenberg posted a photo of himself and Gaetz with Roger Stone, the infamous Trump and Nixon associate and provocateur. A January 2019 video posted on Facebook showed a get-together at the Heathrow home of Chris Dorworth, an influential developer and lobbyist and former state lawmaker. In it, John Morgan, patriarch of the Morgan & Morgan mega law firm and leading advocate for medical marijuana legalization in Florida, holds a cigar in one hand while the other rests on Greenberg's shoulder. The men were celebrating the news that Governor Ron DeSantis would support ending a ban on smokable marijuana.
This is John Morgan coming to you live, Facebook Live, with Joel Greenberg. I owe this man an apology, and it's an apology I promised that I would give. During the campaign for governor, he said that Ron DeSantis would drop the lawsuit for smoke. I called this honest tax collector a liar. He said he wasn't a liar. I said he was a liar. We went back and forth. Today, it was proven that the tax collector is not a liar, and that I am here to apologize to you as I told you I would.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Today was a victory for all Floridians.
Later in the video, Matt Gaetz showed up.
Matt Gaetz is the father of marijuana in Florida with Charlotte's Web.
Yes. Well, you were the energy behind the movement. But how did we get here? How did we get where we fought over smoking for 2 years? What a stupid fight. Right?
Well, I said this to you, and I've said this to you, and I also said it to Mr. Dorworth, who is one of my lobbyists. Not really. But no, he's not. That is not true. That's just a joke. Yes. But I'd like him to be. He's too expensive.
That June, Greenberg's wife, Abby Greenberg, posted an album of photos on Facebook from a trip to Washington, D.C. The photos showed her husband, Dorworth, his wife, and Gaetz touring the Capitol Dome and at the White House, posing with the first couple. In one photo, Gaetz beamed in sunglasses as he posed in front of Donald and Melania Trump, holding Greenberg's daughter in his arms. However, at the end of last month, reports began to surface that revealed there was a far darker side to the Gaetz and Greenberg friendship, which had drawn the eye of federal authorities. The New York Times broke the news March 30th that the sprawling federal investigation into Greenberg had spawned a probe of Gaetz. focused on whether the congressman had a sexual relationship with a 17-year-old and paid for her to travel with him. The probe had launched during the Trump administration under Attorney General William Barr. Among the evidence reportedly gathered during the investigation was information about that April 2018 incident we mentioned in the last episode, in which Greenberg and Gaetz allegedly were recorded by security cameras entering the tax collector's Lake Mary office on Primera Drive together. Martin Comas helped break the story about that visit, which occurred on a weekend night when the office was closed.
Now, in that surveillance video, according to our sources, Joel Greenberg is seen near a basket at the tax collector's office, and this basket is filled with expired driver's licenses that residents have turned in for disposal, for example, when they're renewing their driver's license.
A source with knowledge of the office's operations said Greenberg was seen in the footage going through the basket before entering a back room. That's important, potentially, because the basket features prominently in some of the charges Greenberg faces. He's accused of stealing IDs surrendered by customers from the basket and using them, and other resources of the office, to make fake IDs for himself. There is currently no indication that investigators believe Gaetz had any role in that activity. The weekend office visit was discovered when employees returned to the office that Monday and found that the security alarm had been left off. In text messages seen by the Sentinel, Greenberg confirmed that he had been in the office that weekend with Gaetz. Quote, "Yes, I was showing Congressman Gaetz what our operation looked like," Greenberg texted. However, employees have told the Sentinel that Greenberg had showed Gaetz around the office during business hours, when it was actually operating, around the same period. Greenberg is also accused of using his access as tax collector to protected information about Florida drivers to aid him in trafficking a teenage girl. The same girl, according to reports, is at the center of the sex trafficking investigation of Gaetz. More has since come to light about the federal probe. The Times, in a subsequent report, revealed that the Justice Department was also looking into whether Gaetz and Greenberg had recruited women online through so-called sugar daddy websites and paid them for sex. Greenberg, the report said, would recruit the women and introduce them to Gaetz, who allegedly had sex with them. The Times said it had seen receipts from mobile payment services, including Cash App and Apple Pay, which showed payments from Gaetz and Greenberg to one of the women, and one from Greenberg to a second woman. The men also paid in cash and sometimes used ecstasy, the report said. It should be noted again at this point that Gaetz has not been charged with a crime and denies wrongdoing generally, but also specifically has said he never paid for sex or had sex as an adult with a minor. That said, the details leaking out from the investigation have become more specific. Early this month, CBS News reported that investigators were looking into a Bahamas trip Gaetz allegedly took with several associates, as well as female escorts, in late 2018 or early 2019. That report added a new name to the growing scandal: Jason Pirozzolo. Jason Garcia recently co-authored a profile of Pirozzolo.
Jason Pirozzolo is an Orlando doctor. About 15 years ago, he became friends with a number of Central Florida politicians, particularly some members of the Florida House of Representatives at the time, Chris Dorworth and Jason Broder in Seminole County particularly. And he started traveling to Tallahassee. He's a pilot, so he would fly to Tallahassee to be what is called the doctor of the day.
Every day the state legislature is in session, there's a volunteer physician who serves as doctor to the legislators and staff. The Doctor of the Day. It's mostly a ceremonial title, but it's also a good way to rub elbows with lawmakers, an opportunity Pirozzolo seemed to have relished. Over the past decade, he's been Doctor of the Day 30 times. The Doctor of the Day gets access to the floor of the House and Senate, an exclusive space off-limits to most lobbyists. In a 2015 video testimonial for Pirozzolo's medical practice, then State Representative Rich Workman, a Republican from Brevard County, laid out the influence that Pirozzolo had gained by being the frequent ceremonial doctor to Florida's power players.
Dr. Pirozzolo flies up to Tallahassee several times a year during session to volunteer in the Capitol Clinic, taking care of all of us legislators. And while he's there, he's sure to give us advice on great legislation to pass to make healthcare more accessible to Florida citizens. He's been a big help and helped us pass some significant legislation.
The connections he was developing paid off in 2010, when then-Governor Charlie Crist appointed Pirozzolo to the board of the Greater Orlando Aviation Authority. That's a big deal.
For people that don't know, the Greater Orlando Aviation Authority runs Orlando International Airport, and that's a really powerful job because Orlando International Airport spends a lot of money. It's hundreds of millions of dollars a year on contracts, on vendors and stuff. So getting an appointment to the government that controls that, that's a primo spot. So that was a testament pretty early on of some of the relationships Jason Pirozzolo was developing.
But it was his role in Florida's medical marijuana gold rush that truly fueled Pirozzolo's rise from a secondary political player to successful entrepreneur and major GOP fundraiser. A pivotal moment came on May 1st, 2014, when Pirozzolo was again serving as the House's Doctor of the Day. State representatives were readying to pass the state's first medical marijuana law and were discussing the legislation, which was sponsored by Gaetz. At the 11th hour, an amendment came up that had been added by another state representative, Jason Brodeur, who is an ally of both Gaetz and Pirozzolo. He proposed forcing companies that wanted a marijuana dispensing license to also hire a medical director.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. As was alluded to in questions in the earlier segment, this amendment simply requires that each of the dispensing organizations that we're talking about have a physician to supervise the activities of that organization and provides for the training requirements to enhance safety and oversight of such organizations. That is the amendment, Madam Speaker.
The idea to require medical directors came from Pirozzolo, according to a person familiar with the discussions. The Compassionate Medical Cannabis Act of 2014 formally passed the legislature the next day. A week later, Pirozzolo launched a new consulting business providing medical directors to cannabis companies. Here's a snippet of the new firm's promotional video.
Florida Health Privilege, presenting an unparalleled approach to securing a license to dispense medical cannabis in Florida, and then leading you to success in all stages. Florida Health Privilege offers a turnkey solution to the heavily regulated medical cannabis industry in Florida. We offer unique technical solutions to enhance and strengthen your RFP package. We custom design standards and protocols from the ground up to get you moving towards profitability while maximizing patient and public safety. Florida Health Privilege supplies the required medical director for your facility and provides an exclusive partnership with one of the first medical cannabis testing facilities in the state of Florida.
Winter Garden-based Knox Nursery, which was given one of only 5 marijuana licenses authorized at the time for the entire state, contracted with Pirozzolo's new business to get a medical director, and then won the license for Central Florida. Pirozzolo and a longtime partner were later given a stake in Knox. Pirozzolo's marijuana entrepreneurship was just beginning. After the 2016 passage of another law expanding medical marijuana in Florida, co-sponsored by Gaetz and Brodeur, Pirozzolo launched the American Medical Marijuana Physicians Association, which provides educational programs for doctors and organizes events promoting the industry, which routinely draw prominent Florida political figures. Pirozzolo's personal fortunes rose, as did his political influence.
He's become a much bigger Republican fundraiser now. So, for instance, when Jason Brodeur, there's that name again, when he ran for the state Senate in 2017, one of the biggest early fundraisers in his campaign was one that Jason Pirozzolo hosted at his home in Winter Garden.
Then came the 2018 governor's race. The eventual victor, current Governor Ron DeSantis, began the race as a long shot.
Adam Putnam, who was the agriculture commissioner of Florida at the time, was widely backed, had the most money. Everybody sort of thought he was going to be the Republican nominee for governor, and he was probably going to be governor. Ron DeSantis was seen as the underdog until Donald Trump sort of single-handedly carried him to victory.
We need to elect Ron DeSantis as your governor. And I'm telling you, I know him well. He's a great, great guy. He's going to be an incredible governor. I have no doubt.
But one of the people that was an early DeSantis supporter was Jason Pirozzolo. And so in August 2018, before the primary, Jason Pirozzolo hosts a major fundraiser for Ron DeSantis at his home. This is give you an idea of how significant a fundraiser Jason Pirozzolo is. He also personally flew the governor around the state during his campaign. So Pirozzolo had become, by this point, was a major figure in Florida Republican circles.
After DeSantis was elected governor, he would put Pirozzolo back on the board overseeing Orlando International Airport, an appointment pushed by Gaetz, Brodeur, and Chris Dorworth, the lobbyist and developer we mentioned earlier. Pirozzolo's passion for aviation was a boon to his rise in influence. A marijuana associate told the Sentinel that Pirozzolo's popularity with legislators was thanks, in part, to the fact that he was a pilot who had access to a plane. According to a report by Politico, the Bahamas trip that put Pirozzolo on the radar of federal investigators involved 3 separate flights and 2 private planes, and at least 5 young women, including the alleged victim in the sex trafficking case, who had turned 18 months earlier. Pirozzolo declined to comment on the situation through his attorney. Investigators have reportedly homed in on the trip for potential violations of the Mann Act, which forbids transporting people across state lines to engage in prostitution. According to Politico, one of the women on the trip said nobody involved had engaged in prostitution. That's the end of this episode. We hope you've enjoyed it. It was produced by the Sentinel's Wesley Alden and featured reporting from all of the Sentinel journalists you heard from, as well as Annie Martin, who we featured in episode 1. Next time, we'll delve deep into Greenberg's tenure as tax collector and how he caught the eye of a Sentinel columnist with a knack for holding the powerful to account. Future episodes will delve into the network of power brokers in which Gaetz and Greenberg were members, and we'll continue to follow the latest developments in the broadening scandal. Thanks for listening. Please rate the podcast, subscribe, and tell your friends. And continue to follow our coverage of this saga at orlandosentinel.com/Greenberg.